Excellent stuff. So, yes, my name is Ian Knockolds, the county advisor. And where's my little screen that helps me navigate through things? Our session format then is going to be that we are going to get a presentation from Justin Robinson on the role of the chair. Then we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers based on what Justin has presented. Then there'll be an open discussion, and I'd like to wrap things up before we finish at 1 o'clock. I'd like to wrap things up by just having a chat with you about perhaps themes you'd be interested in covering for future meetings, because we will hopefully do another one of these in the next few months. But without any further ado, and I think we're going to get involved in some interesting screen sharing now. So everything could probably go wrong, but I'm going to hand over to Justin for his presentation on the role of the chair. As I mentioned a few moments ago, Justin does deliver a lot of training for the Wiltshire Association of Local Councils, and the role of the chair is one of the courses that he specialises in, not least because, as he may well say himself, Justin has been a chair of a council as well as being a clerk, so he's a very experienced individual. In fact, actually, before he starts talking, he actually did my role in Somerset as well, so he's a man who wears many hats. And on that bombshell, Justin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's far too hot for hats today, but I appreciate the introduction. I think you'll need to exit your screen share so that I can start mine. Okay, hopefully everyone can now see a fresh presentation on the screen. As Ian's already said, my name's Justin Robinson. I do various bits of training for several county associations and privately with individual councils, and also consultancy, locum clerk work. But I'm still a councillor myself, ultimately. So much of what I do in my training sessions is based very much from practical experience over the past 20 years in various local government roles. And as Ian said, I was very fortunate to serve 8 terms actually as chair of Bruton Town Council, just over the border in Somerset, where I live, which was a very happy and positive time for me, I found. So in order to sort of introduce the role of chair to you, I've sort of come up with sort of 10 top tips, if you like. I could probably write 100 tips if I wanted to, but I've sort of selected sort of 10 key areas here, but really highlight some of the key areas of the role and things to be thinking about, particularly when you're new to the role. So without further ado, I will go through these. When it will let me move on. Okay, so firstly, and perhaps in some way most importantly, is to understand the actual limitations of the role. Because parish councils are corporate bodies, the emphasis is very much on collective decision making. Individual councillors are effectively powerless. It's only when you come together in your meetings, whether they're your main council meetings or committee meetings, if you have them, that as a group, you're actually empowered to make decisions on behalf of the council. Outside of that, individuals cannot be making decisions ever on behalf of the council unless they're staff and you've delegated a particular function to them to deliver on your behalf outside of meetings. For example, if you have certain facilities that require day-to-day management, then your clerk or another staff member, if you have more than one member of staff, are likely to have day-to-day responsibility for dealing with that as and when matters occur. But just because you're chair of council doesn't mean that you're going to get any really additional power or powers at your disposal. There are a couple of exceptions. You can call an extraordinary meeting of council at any time you like. So if you need to have a meeting urgently outside your regular cycle of meetings, then the chair of council can call an extraordinary meeting as he or she sees fit at a time to suit you. Usually best to consult with your clerk to make sure they're free and other members to make sure they're free before you do so. You also have a casting vote. So if you're in a voting situation in a meeting, and there's an equality of votes for and against a particular matter that's up for debate, then as chair of the meeting, you're expected to break the deadlock and use the casting vote. And there's no set way of doing that. It's entirely up to you how you do that. But you don't have additional powers beyond that. It can be a little bit confusing because obviously when we look at Wiltshire Council or Swindon Council and places like that, they have council leaders and cabinet members who have very specific areas of responsibility. And they do have the power to make decisions outside of council meetings. They have quite a broad range of powers at their disposal. But that does not apply within a parish and town council context. Again, the emphasis is on your main meetings, collective decision making. So it's not the case that you can go around deciding to do things outside of meetings that haven't already been discussed and agreed by the council. You just do not simply have the power to be able to do that ever. So that's always an important thing to understand. Although members of the public may sometimes assume that as chair of council, you have more authority than other members, you don't. Ultimately, it's a first among equals role is the best way of looking at it. Secondly, it's always very useful for you to know the rules. Now, you don't need to know everything about how a council operates and runs. You'll have a clerk who will hopefully, if they're new, you'll need to give them time to learn the role because there's a lot to learn. But if you've got an experienced clerk, you'll have somebody there who can answer many of your questions you may have around the procedure and sort of the basic structures and how the council should operate on a day-to-day basis. But you should have a knowledge of the basics, and the place to start is with your council's standing orders. Now, virtually every council has standing orders of some sort. In all likelihood, you'll have the standard format produced by the National Association of Local Councils, which is updated from time to time as legislation changes. And that provides you with a framework, if you like, not just as to how you conduct your meetings, important as that is, but it also has some of the other procedural and duties imposed on councils written into those standing orders so that you know basically how you have to go about doing things. It is a document you can adapt to suit your needs. It's written in such a way that you can add things in or change things. However, if you're always looking at your standing orders, the important thing to remember is that the bits in bold type are mandatory. They are written into legislation. You cannot escape from them. Even if you remove them from your standing orders, they will still apply. So it's usually best to leave those bits in and just tinker around with the bits that aren't in bold type. But having a basic knowledge of standing orders and your council's financial regulations, which are similar type of document, but aimed purely at the financial elements of how the council operates, is important. Because from time to time issues may be raised by the public or other councillors in meetings, and as chair you'll be expected to potentially rule on those and give your opinion as to whether you think that point is valid or not. And if you don't know the rules yourself, that's quite difficult to do. Ideally as well, the clerk will always have a copy to hand at your meetings just in case anybody raises a point related to standing orders. That's what a legitimate point of order actually is. So whilst you're not expected to know everything, knowing the sort of the basic rules and processes will undoubtedly help you in the role should you ever be placed on the spot in a meeting, or just so that you know how things should be running properly during your meetings. Third thing is to be prepared. Now, a lot of work really goes into council meetings. Council meetings in themselves are often the window dressing. Most of the hard work to get you to that point has gone on behind the scenes, either with councillors working on particular projects with the clerk or other staff, or the clerk drawing things up for the council to look at and consider. So the meeting itself, most of the work has gone in before the meeting itself will actually take place. So as chair of a meeting, you need to know what's on the agenda. So ideally, you'll have some time to talk to the clerk prior to the agenda going out, or certainly before the meeting itself takes place, so that you know and understand all of the agenda items that you're going to be expected to take the council through on that particular evening. One of the reasons why we have to give 3 clear days notice for meetings is so that councillors have the time themselves to read any material that's been put forward for the meeting, the agenda, and supporting papers so that they know what's going on and they're prepared to participate in the meeting in an informed way. And as chair, you should do the same. It does show if you turn up to a meeting and you haven't read anything. If you think you can just get away with reading out the agenda headings and everything else will go fine, it possibly won't be the case. So do make sure you have that time. Ask any questions that you think are likely to be raised with your clerk before the meeting, ideally, so that things can run as smoothly as possible and the meeting will appear as professional as possible should members of the public be present. Particularly important with things like controversial planning applications, for instance, how you handle those is always well, it's a bit of a knee trembler for a start for the chair of the meeting normally, because you'll potentially have quite a large audience present, and potentially they'll be quite agitated if they don't like a particular planning application. So making sure that you've read up on the detail and you're there and ready to sort of lead the discussion is very important. Fourth rule, be impartial. Now, this gets a little bit misunderstood at times because impartiality doesn't prevent you from having a view of your own, having an opinion and expressing that opinion within a meeting. It's absolutely fine for the chair to participate in discussions and debates just as any other councillor would have the right to do. However, the important thing is that ideally you shouldn't be dominating proceedings and merely trying to push your point of view across. Impartiality is about allowing all people within the meeting who wish to participate the opportunity to do so. And generally speaking, that's going to be fairly straightforward. Where it can become a little more difficult is if you're in a larger town council potentially that's run maybe along party political lines, in which case the chair needs to make sure that they're not just looking after their own political group's interests, but allowing for members from other viewpoints to have their say as well, should they wish to do so. So that's what we mean by partiality. It's about allowing all to participate, but it doesn't prevent you from participating yourself and from having an opinion yourself and from voting. You can still do everything that any other councillor would do. Just be sure that you encourage and allow everybody a fair crack at the whip, basically. Fifth point is to have a vice chair in office and keep them up to speed with what's going on within the council. Now, the office of chair is a statutory office. That's why you have to sign a declaration of acceptance of office when you're elected as chair at your annual meeting each year. It's a statutory office. The office of vice chair is not statutory. You don't have to have a vice chair of council. The council will still be properly constituted without a vice chair. It won't be if it's without a chair. But having a vice chair is always helpful at the end of the day, because life being what it is, you can never be certain whether you're going to get called away for work or family reasons or be poorly, and you may have to miss a meeting from time to time. And having somebody in place who's able to take on the meeting confidently and run it smoothly and be prepared themselves for what's going to come up is important. So having the vice chair sort of kept up to speed with what's going on in the council is useful. Perhaps include them in discussions with the clerk when you're preparing your agendas or in advance of meetings, so that should anything crop up at the last minute, you've got somebody who will have hopefully the confidence and knowledge to step in and take the meeting forward as you would wish them to. Sixth point is to try and build consensus as much as you can within the council. Well, whilst you're not the leader of the council and sort of in a sort of leadership capacity in that way, generally speaking, if you want to get things done within a council and get lots of things done, the best way to try and do that is in as much of a consensus basis as you possibly can. If things become more sort of adversarial, and factional within a council, that's when problems often start to creep in, and it becomes quite an awkward environment to work in. It will not be such an enjoyable environment to work in as well, and you'll struggle perhaps to get things done in a timely fashion. So often in meetings, there'll be certain issues where everybody will agree, it's fair to say, but there will be times as well when there are a slightly wider range of views. So trying to sort of come up with recommendations as a council or motions as a council after you've debated topics that cover as many different viewpoints as possible and are as acceptable to as many members as possible will tend to build a slightly more harmonious workplace for you all. It does take a little bit more time, and it won't work for absolutely everything because there are certain issues that are always quite divisive in terms of opinion. Planning, for instance, things like car parking is another one that often causes problems. And people would tend to have very strong views one way or another on topics like that. And building consensus can be slightly more difficult. And it's exactly the same, ultimately, particularly on planning, when Wiltshire Council, Swindon Council are making their decisions. Things will not go along party lines. There'll be strong views either way on certain types of planning application. But for the vast majority of the other things you're looking at, and certainly new projects potentially you'll want to do as a council, then try and build consensus, get as many viewpoints included in what you're doing, and take things forward in that way. It will build a much nicer environment for you to be chair of your council, and it will basically make it feel more inclusive for other members as well. It will save you problems in the long run. Another thing I'd try and encourage you to do is work as a team with your council staff. Now, councils come in all shapes and sizes, from serving a population of sometimes less than 100 through to 150,000 people plus. You may have just one staff member, your clerk, working very, very part-time hours, or you may have a whole team of officers at your disposal. It doesn't matter. It is not your job to line manage them, ultimately. It is the council who is the employer of the clerk and other staff. You may have a staffing committee or HR functions as part of one of your other committees, in which case they will manage that particular side of things, but it is not your job as chair of council to act as line manager. That goes back to what I said right at the beginning about individual councillors being powerless. It's a corporate body. You do not, as individuals, have the ability to make decisions as individuals on behalf of the council. Therefore, no one individual can line manage the clerk or anybody else. However, particularly in smaller councils, the relationship between the chair and the clerk is key, ultimately. Part-time clerks work from home usually. It can be quite a lonely and isolated role, and having a good working relationship with the chair is important to them at the end of the day. And they will often take direction from the chair and seek the chair's opinion before doing things on behalf of the council. So you will almost, in a smaller council, get a form of line management by default kind of arrangement by mutual consent on both sides. But it is not a formal arrangement ever at the end of the day. And that's an important point to remember. It's not your job to micromanage your staff ever, or any other councillor's job. Again, that is something that will almost certainly lead to problems down the line. Key thing to remember always is that councils are there and councillors are there when they come together in their meetings to give strategic direction to the council and to make the decisions that need to be made. It's then up to your staff to implement those decisions. Yes, you need to have robust processes in place, appraisals and policies to deal with underperformance and things like that, should staff underperform and not do what the council has instructed. But it's not the job of the chair or other councillors to micromanage in between meetings and try and direct staff to do things in particular that the council has not already agreed to. That's important. Eighth point I'd make is always keep calm if you're having to manage conflict. Hopefully, you won't have to do this too often. It's fair to say, but in the 8 years I chaired my town council, I was quite lucky for the most part. I can only remember one or two meetings when things got a little bit heated. But if things do, and it might involve fellow councillors or it might involve members of the public, as chair, you've always got to keep calm. You've got to be the grown up in the room, ultimately, from time to time. Now, if you're managing conflict within meetings, there are procedures you can potentially use in your standing orders to remove people if they're being particularly disruptive. Normally, verbal warnings will do the trick, but there are processes in your standing orders to allow for you to potentially remove people if they're really disruptive. Obviously, you don't want to go down that line particularly. But there may also be occasions when you need to have a quiet word, perhaps with one of your fellow councillors outside of a meeting, or arrange to talk maybe with the clerk or another councillor. Best not to ever do it on your own, with a group of people or one member of the public potentially, if there's a particular problem that's been addressed, that needs to be addressed. Obviously, you can't force your councillors to behave. That's not your job. You're not in charge of standards. That is the job of the monitoring officer at Wiltshire or Swindon Council. But having a quiet word sometimes, particularly explaining to councillors if their behaviour is having a negative impact, can do the trick. Certainly, the 3 or 4 occasions I've perhaps done it in the past, it's worked. People have realised that perhaps their behaviour was just not up to the standard that it should have been, and they've apologised as a result. But try and nip it in the bud as much as you can, as early as you can, should those particular situations arise. It's always worth a go, because getting into a more formal kind of process for dealing with problems within the council is often, well, it'll often go nowhere ultimately because it's outside of the council's control. It's dealt with by monitoring officers and your principal authorities who usually have many other priorities, and policing parish councils is fairly low down the list, I'm afraid to say, largely because they don't have any powers of sanction ultimately to use as things currently stand. So if you can try and deal with things calmly within the council as much as you possibly can early on, then you'll save yourself a lot of potential headaches and time wasted in the future. Ninth point is encourage your council to have a plan. Now, I always put this in just about every presentation I give. It doesn't matter what it is, but I do really strongly believe that it will help you if your council has some form of plan in place to guide your actions. Now, it doesn't have to be anything grandiose. Even a side of A4 that the council signs up to, detailing a few things you want to achieve in the next year, it will help you. It will give you something to work towards and something to judge yourselves against as well. But many councils as well these days like to have a wider conversation with their local community. So I'm a big fan personally of what are called sometimes village plans, community plans, town plans, where you will directly go out to your residents, usually with a survey, seek their opinions on a wide range of topics potentially, and then sort of build a plan for your council as to how you're going to deliver what your residents actually want to see on the ground. Those take a little bit of time and resource to prepare. But in my own council, we do one roughly every 10 years. We're just about to start out the latest one at the moment. And we do a large community survey. We normally get at least sort of 30 to 40% of households responding, which is usually really good. And we get a really clear steer then as to what the community wants to see us sort of focus our resources on, our attention on over the next 5 to 10 years. We can then budget accordingly and hopefully go out and deliver as much as we possibly can of what people want to see. You'll learn an awful lot about your community by doing a community plan. But again, if you're very small, that's possibly going to be a sort of stretch on your resources, or it's something you'll need to prepare for in advance. So having your own council plan, as I say, can be really, really short. but it's good to see lots of councils of all shapes and sizes having corporate plans these days, basically to guide them and give them something to work towards. And also, it'll help with your budgeting, and it will help you potentially, particularly if it's off the back of public consultation, to bring in external funding as well for particular projects. So give yourselves, as a council, a sense of purpose, I would always suggest. And finally, my advice would be to enjoy yourself in the role. It should be a privilege at the end of the day. Obviously, in towns, in some towns at least, the chair of council will go by the title of town mayor, and will, during their time in office, have plenty of civic roles to fulfill, lots of engagements. It can take over your life to a certain degree. If you're a town mayor in a large town, you'll probably have hundreds of engagements per year to go to. And that's why it's often restricted to a year or 2 years maximum, so that you can still get on with your life outside of that. But it's fair to say that a lot of times I get asked, well, how much time should I actually be devoting to this? There's no simple answer to that at the end of the day, because all councils are different. You all do different things. But remember, you're one of a group, ultimately. Other councillors should be sharing the load, getting out there and doing some of the work on the ground, as well as the chair. It's not you that has to be doing everything on behalf of the council. So spread the workload as much as you possibly can. And don't let the role take over your life, I would suggest, because it is the sort of thing that very easily can. And great, if you're retired and you've got nothing else to do, then obviously you could devote plenty of time to it. But if you've got other responsibilities, always take time for those as well, I would suggest. Okay, Ian, so that's sort of 10 quick points from me. I think we should do a quick plug for the fact we've got a couple of fuller training sessions coming up in the not too distant future, where and hopefully there's still spaces available on them, otherwise I'm wasting my time. But do give some thought as to whether you want to come along to a more formal training session. We spend about 2.5 hours going through all these points and much, much, much more, including meeting preparation and also conducting meetings and things like that. We talk more about conflict management and learn from each other's experience in that regard. And many of the other sort of legal quirks that go with the chair of council role. So as I say, we've got sessions coming up in May and June. So if you'd like to learn more, and do feel free to come along and book into those.
Thanks very much, Justin.